can you say that again?
So I'm recording on my Apple Watch tonight.
Yeah? Is
Yeah,
this
I'm
how?
just trying to make sure you can see me okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, good
There's,
episode.
there's,
See you next week.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for a cinematic odyssey through the 100 greatest films spanning from the roaring 1920s to the cutting-edge masterpieces of 2024. Carefully curated from the lovely people on Letterboxd. Two intrepid souls embark on a journey through a treasure trove of timeless classics and groundbreaking contemporary works, where each frame embodies the enduring magic of the silver screen. Grab your popcorn and join us on this epic expedition through a century of cinematic excellence, where every film promises to enchant, inspire, and leave an indelible mark on the soul. And now, for your listening pleasure, here are the LetterBros.
Welcome back, everybody, to LetterBros, where we let a wheel decide what movie we watch next based off the top 100 movies on Letterboxd. As always, I am Felix, and I'm joined by Parker. How we doing today, buddy?
Sake, sake, sake.
Oh, okay. There we go. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers. Doing good. Yeah, just need to decompress after that one, you know?
Yeah, this is definitely one that you need to drink after watching it, but in the best way possible, I believe.
Yeah. Spoiler alert for those of you that have not seen Grave of the Fireflies. Click out of this video right now. Everybody dies. Everybody dies
Within the first 5 minutes of the movie. Not even 30 seconds.
I guess in the first 5 minutes, everyone has already died, and then we take a step back and we kind of learn how we got to this point. But yeah, dude, Grave of the Fireflies, our second Studio Ghibli film, this time directed by Isao Takahata, and it was a 1988 film that follows two siblings, Saita, which is voiced originally by Tsutomu Tatsumi, and forgive me if I mispronounce that. So we're following him and his younger sister, Setsuko, who's voiced by Ayano Shisharishi. And they're struggling to survive in Japan towards the end of World War II. Their father is off in the naval fleet fighting, and they are living at the beginning-ish of the movie with their mother. And we kind of hop in during an air raid, and there's several air raids that take place over the course of the film. They lose their mother very early on, and now they're left essentially to their own devices. So we follow these two as they navigate the war-torn Japan, and they try to survive off of rations and what their mother left them. It's a great exploration of their relationship and what they'll do to look out for one another. A lot of tears. It's impossible to watch this movie without at least shedding one tear. And it's a great exploration of the impact of war without necessarily diving directly onto the front lines like we see with a lot of war movies such as Saving Private Ryan, so on and so forth. So yeah, we'll dive into it. I loved that we kind of got to see the horrible sides of war without necessarily war being at the forefront of it. It's very much the backdrop. But I love movies that kind of just let you know how devastating it is to the people that you don't necessarily think about. Similar to what we had with Civil War earlier this year, where you're just following a group of people and kind of exploring what that landscape is like. So yeah, I was excited to draw it. And what are your thoughts on the film? You said you watched it 3 times now, right?
4 times now.
Okay, so I have a feeling I know what your score will be for enjoyability and rewatchability.
So what I'll preface it with is the first time that I watched it, I was kind of like in and out of sleeping through it. So, and not because it was boring or anything, I was just dead tired. But I watched it a second time all the way through, and I was just, it broke me. But then, maybe a week or so had passed. We were still waiting to record, and I watched it again, realizing that upon a rewatch, this movie is kind of a complete cycle if you really think about it. And then going into the 4th time, this was literally last night, just because I wanted to know a little bit more, and I had some questions that I feel a rewatch would have answered. And plus, I just really I loved this movie. This has become quickly my favorite Ghibli film, and so much that I will not be talking about Howl's Moving Castle today.
Wow, snaps to that. I will just jump right out and say that I am finding myself to be more partial towards Spirited Away. I absolutely loved this film, but if we're just comparing the two Ghibli films side by side, I would find myself going back to Spirited Away first. And obviously, that probably has to do with the heavy nature of Grave of the Fireflies. Spirited Away also delved into some difficult themes to grapple with. And I just found it to be a little bit more enticing to the eye and to the brain when it came to the kind of surreal things that were happening. Grave of the Fireflies is a film that's very based in reality. There's not a lot going on. There's nothing going on actually that is supernatural or outside of the realm of the normal. And the animation style really reflects that. I think it's super cool that we have two vastly different looking movies between our two Ghibli films.
You could obviously tell that this is an older movie, with it being like, Spirited Away, a lot more like broad use of colors. The animation is a lot smoother, but I would say that I don't know, man, there was just something about the how real the movie was, but having it go through animation that just made it hit a little harder. And I mean, obviously there's other
Mhm.
animated movies that hit the way that this does. Like the first one I think of is Watership Down, that it's told in the form of animation, but it's a story that's still very heavy hitting and
Yeah.
it still deals with a lot of very heavy topics. And this one definitely does.
It's
Going
funny you
back to
should
your
mention
point.
that because and not to interrupt, but I was thinking Watership Down frequently because as a kid, that was an animated movie that made me realize that there are hard things in life to grapple with. And I think that this had a similar nature to it.
Absolutely.
And
And I think
some
so as
very
well.
difficult imagery in the beginning with their mother.
Oh my
Very
god, I
difficult.
screamed when I first saw that. I was like, again, I was expecting this movie to be sad. I wasn't expecting it to be graphic. So when you
Mhm.
see their mom wrapped up in bandages for the first time, I yelped. It was terrifying. Like you're
It
not
looks straight
expecting
out
that.
of Goodnight Mommy. Have you seen Goodnight
Espe-
Mommy?
no, what is that?
It's a horror movie where the mother is bandaged and bloody, and I won't get into it, but yeah, it was terrifying.
But even like when you see her later and she's like covered in fucking maggots and stuff, like it was brutal, dude. And then after I think it's during the first air raid when after Saita and Setsuko have already kind of like found shelter like alongside a river, it cuts back to like flames and then the screams of a baby while also seeing like the multiple dead bodies after the air raid has commenced, and you're just left like, oh my god, there's a baby alone. But it cuts to like a mother holding the baby, so it's like you're left in that suspense. And that's very early on in the movie. That's like what, 15 minutes in.
Hmm.
But so what I'll say is that, again, like Parker said, this movie lets you know right there and then the main character is going to die. It literally begins with Saita dying, right? In like a train station. And this is why I say that this movie kind of acts as a perfect cycle, is that we begin after Saita has already lost everything. He's lost his mom, he's lost his sister, he's lost his father, he's lost everything, and we're left with just that image. And throughout the movie, you kind of see these, I'm going to call them like ghosts, kind of, because it's
Sure.
whenever it's you see him orange and you see him like in his military uniform and you see Setsuko in like her little getup that she gets in the beginning of the movie. And this is how we know that this is, I guess, them in the spirit world. And when you see Setsuko for the first time in that, she's smiling at Saita, kind of looking like she's seeing him again after she has already died. So after watching this a second or third or fourth time, once that clicked the first time, I was like, this movie is an absolute masterpiece, that it can just, because it ends also with him cremating his own sister. And I know I'm jumping all over the place, but it just serves
Okay.
the purpose of that. The end of the movie is him essentially like letting go of his sister, and then you're assuming that maybe months or so later he's put in that position that we see in the beginning of the movie. And it's a continuous cycle of them just going back and revisiting that moment in time. And it was
Yeah, and
just
I think that it subverted my expectations in some way because a lot of times when you begin a movie with the main character telling you that they have died, you spend the rest of the movie kind of leading up until that very moment. So take Sunset Boulevard, for example, where and why do I find a way to tie every movie to Sunset Boulevard? Since we
Because you
started this?
secretly love
But
Sunset Boulevard.
but what's his name? Schmuck McJoe is in the pool, and then eventually he gets shot at the end of the movie. This one, however, we see Setsu die pretty much immediately after he tells us he died on that day. That's how it begins. And little did I expect for him to lose everyone that he loved along the way until finally turning in on his own.
Exactly.
So he was the last of his nuclear family to survive, and eventually he perished, and in time is forgotten about. And it's a very heart-wrenching but very real and difficult story to navigate, especially knowing that this is based in reality. There are families that genuinely not too far off from what actually happened to them, and that's just a terrible thing to sit there and chew on. But it's told in such an elegant manner that in a way it feels very respectful, because it allows you to cherish the moments that Setsu had leading up to his death. Even though he was faced with these horrible circumstances, there's still a lot of laughter in this movie, and there's still a lot of love shown between the two siblings. So again, I'm kind of all over the place as well. I think my mind is kind of digesting the movie still, and that's a sign of a good movie. It's one that you take away and you chew on a little bit and you ruminate on it, and yeah.
And so funny that you mentioned about how it's
I'm
so
listening,
grounded
guys.
in reality, and that it could be, yeah, I heard you. And that it could be based somewhat on someone's real experiences, because this movie in some way is. Grave of the Fireflies is a semi-autobiographical short story by Akiyuki Nosaka, who actually lived in Kobe, Japan, which is where this takes place. It's based on an actual air raid by American bombers dropping incendiary missiles. And they weren't really missiles. It was just kind of giant tubes filled with like napalm that just, wherever it landed, it would just catch the surrounding area on fire. But it was American bombers dropping this on the city of Kobe during the closing moments of World War II, and everybody wanted to jump on to make this an adaptation. There were tons of studios that wanted to get onto his story, and he kind of just didn't feel that live action would do his story justice. But when Ghibli approached him, he was very surprised because he wasn't really sure about animation. But then Ghibli showed him the mock-ups of Kobe, of like what they drew up of Kobe, Japan. And I mean, I think you actually see it in the movie. There's a shot of an American bomber like going over Kobe, Japan, and it literally looks like, it almost just looks like a picture, an aerial view of the docks, like the loading docks for boats in Kobe, and it looks phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that it was based off the autobiographical short story, because I had seen
Semi, because like in the movie, the main character dies, and this guy was able to live through the story. But
sure. But in a way, it makes you think. Even in life, can you be dead in a way? Because even before he has physically left the realm, we see him in I believe it's a subway station among 10 other people that are also starving and struggling and dying. And it goes to show that Setsu is one of many who have embraced Saita. Excuse me. Saita is one of many who have faced these difficulties.
And especially like young men who, he was trained to like be an army man. His father was a Navy guy who we never see him we briefly see him in like a flashback, but predominantly he is out fighting this war. And he has this image that, Japan is on the winning side. They're going to defeat the enemy, until later on in the movie when he's literally withdrawing the little bit of money that he has left to go and feed his sister. They pretty much are talking about how Japan has issued an unconditional surrender, and that all naval fleets have been destroyed, including the one we assume that his father was on. But
and he has that realization too, where he says, my father's dead, isn't he? He kind of says that to himself.
Exactly. But in another thing is that Takahata, so the director, also drew inspiration from his own personal life during the war because something I guess that like him and Nosaka connected with was how the incendiary bombs would detonate, and not necessarily, like I said, detonate, like they would just drop on the ground and just spread fire
I was
around the
about to bring
area.
that up. Yep.
Oh, dang.
No, that's awesome because Takahata witnessed it. I believe he even said he's witnessed what these bombs looked like. So to him, it was important to create a realistic depiction of those incendiary bombs. From my understanding as well, when Takahata made this film, I don't think that it was necessarily his intention to create an anti-war film. It was more so to just depict the realistic nature of what it was that happened and how people adapted to their circumstances or failed to adapt to their circumstances.
Yeah, and I never really got like an anti-war vibe from it. It's like what you said, that it's mainly just a window into what the non-fighting population of a certain country at war with another is going through during war times. Like you never really see, and you could tell obviously this is the tail end of World War II, because we never see Japan on the uprise of this conflict. It's always the American fleet coming in and just bombing Kobe pretty much every day, like to the point where it's becoming routine for Saita to actually go back to his village during these bombings while people are running away. He's running into the villages now that people have abandoned their homes and starting to steal items to help take care of his sister. And that's obviously like there's a lot of things that have happened after that to lead him to this moment, but
yes,
it's just
and I don't want to misspeak on Takahata's intention, but I believe that it was in some ways also meant to be a critique of the Japanese Empire and the fact that, so if you look into the history of World War II, you know that Japan, they were relentless in the sense of never surrendering, essentially. At one point, Saita does say that's a kamikaze plane, which kind of gives us insight as to what's happening just all around. As you were saying, no matter what the reason is for the war, no matter who is fighting the war on what territory, for what reasons, and who's involved, it's always going to have a negative effect somewhere on people who have no stake in the fight, essentially. And that's kind of what we got to see here. It was very much a little slice of life. We don't really spend much time with any characters outside of the two siblings. We do have a little bit of time when they're living in their aunt's house, however. And I want to ask you what you thought about that point in the movie where they are living with their aunt, their decision to move out and move into the shelter. And I want to highlight one thing that I really liked about this movie was the ghost of Saita visiting back when they're giving up the kimonos for rice and looking back on it in the afterlife and maybe thinking that it was a mistake to do so because now they have all died anyways. And he has that perspective as a ghost of himself, realizing that they have given up something that his sister was so attached to, of their mothers. And for what? Essentially, all they did was delay their inevitable death. So I thought it was a very poignant point in the movie to have him see that in retrospect after having passed away and hearing his sister crying because the kimonos are being given up. And then seeing the aunt
literally covering his ears listening to her cry because it just brings back such harsh memories. I know, dude. But continue.
So part of me wishes that there was more explored with their relationship with their aunt, because I thought that there was a very good plot point that could have been explored a little bit more in creating the aunt as some form of antagonistic figure, because they do have a rift in which the aunt wants to feed her own children more of the rice that they got because they gave up their mother's kimonos. So they're the ones that paid the emotional toll for it. And now she's refusing to give them the benefit. So I thought that was a very interesting dynamic that was created. I wish that we spent a little bit more time with it. But yeah, what was your takeaway on the character of the aunt and her relationship to our two main protagonists?
So the aunt, I believe, wasn't giving them the better dishes because, like, Setsuko says that I don't like rice soup, it's nasty, but she's making rice cakes for her children, not because they gave away the kimonos, but because they're actually working to help benefit the country.
That's what I mean.
Where,
Yeah.
yeah, where, Setsuko and Saita, well, more Saita, is really kind of just not doing anything. He's just kind of living with his aunt, not contributing much and not doing anything. But I mean, what can you do? He's a 14-year-old kid who's just lost his mother, who has now pretty much become the primary caretaker of his 4-year-old sister. Like, I didn't really like vibe with the aunt at all. I thought she was just an awful person at
Hmm.
some points. I mean, obviously, like when she took them in, that's a grand undertaking. I hate that they kept calling them orphans in front of Setsuko, because at this point, Setsuko thinks that her mom is still alive,
Right.
and Saita is working very hard to not have her realize that. And there's a point in the movie when she does, and it's heartbreaking. But it's just the aunt is not wanting to keep that veil over Setsuko, and just, kind of teetering the line of like, okay, maybe I'll keep it a secret, or I'm just gonna go and tell her because she needs to know that's her mother. That's,
Hmm.
because Saita
Yeah.
keeps saying, "Oh, we're gonna go and visit her in the hospital. We're gonna go and visit her here," to the point where later on in the movie, when she does find out that her mom is dead, he even continues to put that veil over her eyes, being that, "Oh, yeah, she's buried under this beautiful tree, and we'll go visit her someday." And the camera literally pans to her ashes in a box that was given to him when they literally threw his mom into a pile with other bodies that were burned.
Right.
So it's just, that's the part where and I just, again, I felt very connected with Setsuko and wanting to just be with Saita as well, to just keep her away from all the bad shit that was going on. And the aunt was just pushing back and just, being an awful person.
And what a testament to Tatsumi and Shiraishi, who voiced Saita and Setsuko, because even in the form of animation, their performances brought through such emotion and allowed you to connect to them in such a powerful way. And Felix, I really found myself crying during this movie, not when there was death, not when there were horrible things happening, but in moments such as them swishing the water around to get the flavored fruit drop water. And whenever the two would share those intimate moments of brotherly and sisterly love, that's where I found myself getting very emotional, because there's so much happiness that they were able to find in their given circumstances. And that really struck a chord with me, thinking that no matter how difficult it is, you have the people that you care about and that care about you, and you're able to make each other's day brighter and make life a little bit sweeter, no matter the fact that these horrible things are going on around you. So I thought that the juxtaposition that was shown between their incredible relationship and their moments of laughter chasing each other, as opposed to the bombing and the screaming and the crying and the death, I just thought it was very well done. It was so graceful. Never did I feel like this movie was, throwing things in my face, trying to make me feel one way or the other.
Mhm.
It just allowed you to watch and experience it alongside these characters. It really pulled on the heartstrings in a very phenomenal way.
And going back to your point of like, how my feelings on the aunt, and just kind of piggybacking off what you're saying, that they're finding moments of happiness during this time of crisis. There's a scene where the two of them, or Saita's playing a piano and kind of teaching her like scales and teaching her a song, and they're just having a good time, and all of a sudden the aunt is telling them to like keep it down. You guys are freeloaders, you're not doing anything, like how could you be happy in this time of crisis? Like, they have lost everything and are still continuing to find happiness through this. That's not something that should be shot down, that's something that should be cherished. Just going back to the voice acting, Setsuko is probably one of the most adorable and one of the most tragic characters I've ever seen put to screen. every time Setsuko was on screen or speaking or just, just showing this true innocence of a child, it was like what you said, it's tear jerking because throughout everything that's going on, and like she's seeing all of this go through. She's seeing the bombs being dropped down in her village. She's even asking, "Oh, is our house burned down?" She's going through so much at such a young age. And there's a scene in particular that every time I saw it, it just made my heart sink. It's when Saita had just visited his mom and saw her in the bandages for the first time, and they're kind of just sitting around, and she just wants to see her mom, and Saita's just like, no, no, we'll see her later, we'll see her later. And you just start to hear her just sniffle up and build up into this just sob, and it's so heart-wrenching, it's so real. And it gets to a point where even Saita's like, "Oh, look at me," like trying to distract her, and she's just continuing to just pour out her feelings, and just it's done so well.
And at that point, she didn't even to Setsuko. Their mom is not dead. It's just the thought that she might die that is overwhelming her emotionally. And I think we've all been there with relatives or pets, even or anyone that is going through a difficult time health wise, and they're still with us, but the prospect of losing them is such an overwhelming feeling, and that is what was on display here. And I agree. I connected emotionally in that moment with this movie as well. And you're right. It was incredibly powerful, and it was done incredibly well by the voice actress. And you're right. As a character, she is. Both of them are fun to fall in love with in a way, because I think that throughout the movie, it's displayed that Setsuko kind of has a way of making Saita feel better by asking him for help. And I like to think that she kind of knows that that's how she can make him feel better, is by saying, "Oh, I have to go to the bathroom," or "I'm hungry," and then allowing for Saita to deliver for her and take care of her. It makes Saita feel better.
And be
And
thankful for that too. She's never,
it is. Yeah. Her
but
last words to Saita are "thank you" before she dies with a piece of watermelon in her hand.
hearing that line 4 times does not get any easier. It's
I
just
bet.
Setsuko never woke up after you just see the camera pan down with her with the watermelon next to her. And that was also another reason why I wanted to rewatch it, because they say that when he takes her to the doctor says she's malnourished.
Hmm.
But I mean, they're eating rice, they're eating fruit, they're like, what other nourishment
Hardly, hardly.
does
I
I
mean,
mean, hardly, but I ended up just going down a rabbit hole of just other things that were going on, and a lot of people blamed Saita for her diminishing health, which you can't really blame them. You can't blame
you,
Saita
I would say in
completely.
some way they could have stayed with their aunt, and it would have been.
That correct.
I
That's what
mean,
they would say. That's what Kiora would say, is that, hit their decision to leave the aunt's place
killed them.
was all just, yeah, in some way, yes, and that his pride was over, like his pride took him over and kind of, swayed his decision making into a very negative aspect, because you see early on that, like, even when they're living with the aunt, when they go to the beach, like he's washing the salt water on these rashes that she has, and she doesn't have that many at first. But as you go through the movie, you start to see her health diminish, especially obviously after they leave the aunt's place and live in the cave. There's even a point where like he's combing her hair, and you start to see these little things on the comb. And upon first viewing, I was like, I don't really know what this is. But looking into it, it seems that she has lice, and
Mm,
that the lice is also diminishing her health. And because of this diminishing health, she's also acquiring what's called Pica syndrome. Have you ever heard of that?
no.
So, Pica syndrome is a mental disorder where you start to eat non edible items because, upon Setsuko's last scene, we see that she's kind of chewing on something, and we realize that it's a marble
Mm-hmm.
that she put into the little fruit candies can. And we start to, I mean, after rewatching, you kind of realize that maybe this is what she was doing while Saita was out stealing, getting food, pulling his savings out. Because there's a scene where after he takes her to the doctor, all Setsuko wants to, and this was another just heartbreaking scene, is when she's just asking him, please don't go, because she's afraid of being alone because her brain is just going to start making her want to eat rocks and marbles, things that are not nourishing her and just making her health even worse.
Interesting. I took that to just be a state of general delirium that she was at, where she
Yeah.
was eating the marble and the rocks. And I mean, just so emotionally heavy when she offers her brother something to eat, not realizing that it's a rock that it cannot be eaten. And
Mm-hmm.
just showing that even though she's in this terrible state and completely hungry and unwell, she still is offering this up to her brother. And there are moments when he is, taking care of his sister at his own expense. And they're both looking after each other without regard for themselves. And I love that. I love that they have that kind of relationship. I will
Mm-hmm.
agree with those who will say that it's kind of their fault. And I think that that is one issue that I do have with the movie at large, is that I don't necessarily think that the decision making was super on point, and that removes me a little bit emotionally, because there are things that they could have done in order to prevent their eventual demise. I truly think had they stayed with their aunt, they probably would have at least had nourishment. They would have had a roof over their head, and they
Mm-hmm.
probably wouldn't have devolved at least as quickly to the state in which they both ultimately end up. So I agree with that. I do think that it's a slight flaw. Maybe if something had forced them out of their aunt's house, if she had kicked them out, it would have
Mm-hmm.
landed a
Or if
little
she
bit
would have
more.
died in an air raid or
Oh
something,
God,
but
yeah, just kill more people. I mean,
exactly, which I was kind of expecting. I'm like, there's something like kind of nice happening. Why do I feel like this isn't going to last for much longer? But it's, it kind of subverts your expectations, and being that, it's not the war that's going to make him make this decision. It's his adolescence and his stubbornnness that
also
ultimately
fuck the
lead.
aunt for not even trying to get them to stay. I mean,
Oh
she
my
was like,
God. Yeah. When
"All right, dude."
he's like packing everything, he's just like, bye. Have fun. Yeah, she's also not the greatest person, but her kids were so nice though.
Mhm.
Like they were even talking about it, just being like, "Were you being mean to those kids again?" And she's just like, "Yeah, I am, because they're not contributing anything." Which fair enough, but this is also a 4-year-old and a 14-year-old. Like, what do you? Her kids are. I don't think we ever get an age, but I feel that they're like, either late teens or early 20s at least.
Yeah, I agree. Late
Like they're
20s or
working.
early 20s is what I was thinking.
Which I'm like, why are you still living with your parents then, bro? If you're that much of an adult, quit freeloading, bro. But again, ultimately, like the best thing and the thing that kept me coming back to this movie and what makes me really enjoy this is the relationship that these two siblings have. It's infectious. It's something that, coming with from somebody with a sibling, like that's, it's kind of the relationship that I have with my sibling, that like no matter what's going to happen and no matter like, what kind of arguments that we'll have or what's going on, that we're always going to try and be there for each other as much as we can. And it's a beautiful thing, and especially just the performances from these two characters make it that much more believable and that much more infectious to watch. Like you want to just keep seeing them happy and keep seeing them, triumph over war, triumph over the consequences of war. And they do up until, their deaths.
Yeah, and you see them continue to adapt. One, before we move into the rankings, one little scene that stood out to me as well was when they're frolicking along, and Setsuko is beginning to cry because she believes that there's no fruit drops left. Saita bangs on the can and gets three out, and she pours them onto her hand, and then also three little crumbs end up on her thumb area. And instead of eating a fruit drop, she licks the crumbs and puts the fruit drops back so that she'll have them for later. And that cheers her up. The prospect of that later down the line when she's feeling down, she'll still have those to go back to. And but you know that eventually she's going to run out of fruit drops. And I mean, it just speaks to you in a way that movies don't always speak to you. Because how often do we have that in everyday life where we know eventually we're going to have to cross this bridge, but for now we're going to do the small thing that will make us feel a little bit better for the time being. And
Mhm.
I just thought it was brilliant. I thought it was really great. Again, well performed, well created, and beautifully animated. But yeah, I don't have any more final thoughts to bring up before we
Yeah,
move on.
I think everything else is just going to be said in the rankings.
Yeah, shall we then?
We shall.
And then we get to spin the wheel, dude.
I know, I'm excited, dude. It's going to be great. But before we do that, we got to dive into these rankings. Cuz as you probably guessed, I'm going to have some pretty high scores for this movie in a lot of different aspects. But so as always, our first category is enjoyability and rewatchability. Obviously, this is the first movie that I want to say, did I saw Spirited Away twice for this show. This is obviously the most amount of times that I've watched a movie for the show. So, and because it's quickly become, and we still have Princess Mononoke down the line, which I've heard is fantastic. So I'll go ahead and say that this is my favorite Ghibli film so far, but we still have a Miyazaki movie down the line. But I'm going to jump the gun and say it 14 out of 15.
Wow.
This movie, while again has proven that it is rewatchable, it is a cyclical movie. This movie in some way never ends because it begins in death and ends in life, or at least towards the end of one's life. I mean, as much as it makes me bawl to tears every time we see that scene of what is Setsuko doing while Saita is out, and we get these little flashbacks of her like running around swinging on a swing, and then just cuts to her in a child-sized coffin. It makes me just want to vomit with emotions every time I see it. In the sadness, there is something beautiful in watching the relationship between these two siblings that just hits me in a way that I haven't really felt in a lot of movies that I've seen recently, and I'm glad that this movie exists, and I will continue to rewatch this movie forever.
Yeah, I'm surprised that we got through actually our whole conversation without bringing up the Fireflies at any point.
Oh my god, dude. I feel like that's the so just even jumping off of that. So the Fireflies is something that keeps coming up throughout the movie, and it kind of, I would say this is like the climax of the movie, because up until the point we see Saita keeping this veil over Setsuko to not letting her know that her mom is dead. And they spend this evening, in their first evening in the cave. He brings a whole bunch of fireflies into the cave, into this mosquito net, and it's beautiful. It's one of the most gorgeous things of animation I've ever seen. Cut to the next day, Setsuko is putting all of the fireflies into a grave. He literally asks, "What are you doing?" And Setsuko says, "I'm building a grave because I'm sure they built a grave for mom." And it just instantly, Saita just, his whole demeanor changes as she's putting the fucking fireflies into a grave. We then cut to her mom's body being thrown into a pit, being burned. And just the imagery is so shocking after seeing such a beautiful scene, to where now she knows her mom is dead. Saita has done everything he can and still couldn't even hide the fact of his mom's death. And it's just, she even asks, like, why do fireflies only live so little? You
Yeah,
know,
and then
we
they
start
say,
to
I
ask
think that,
ourselves the same question. Why did Setsuko live so little when
well,
she
yeah, I
was
think the Fireflies are representative of civilians in wartime, and these two specifically, you always see them glowing with one another, right?
Mhm.
And eventually they end up, as many do, in a grave, sometimes a mass grave, like how she had with the Fireflies, where she piled all of their bodies into one. Yeah, I think that it was a beautiful allegory that they had on display throughout the film. So I just wanted to mention it briefly before we continue to dive into our rankings.
Yeah, before we get in the comments, you didn't even talk about the Fireflies, bro. What the fuck?
But I did. I think you'll be shocked, but I stand by. I give this a 9 out of 15 for enjoyability and rewatchability. Actually, pop that to a 10 because it was very, in a weird way, enjoyable. And I think I could benefit from a rewatch, but I don't think it's something that I'm going to continue to go back to this well. I think I've watched it once and it's made its impression on me, and I appreciate it for what it is. But it's definitely not something I'm going to continue revisiting. And that's not necessarily due to the heavy nature of the film. I do think that there was some repetition in the film, and there was a lack of super high stakes. You know what? Let me not say that, but there was a lack of scale, I guess you could say, to this movie, which makes me hesitate to go back to it. It's definitely not a fun movie to watch, but I really enjoyed my first watch for it. I think that the movie has a lot to say, and I feel cozy with it there at a 10. For the story, I'm going to give it a 12 out of 15. I think that it was very well told. We got a little bit of insight onto who these two were in the time immediately preceding their death, and what their relationship was, and what their relationship could have grown into had they not been faced with these horrible circumstances. So I think there was a lot of beautiful storytelling through imagery, through music. We haven't mentioned the score either, but I think that the music was very, very on point for what it was that we were experiencing. Yeah, the story kind of has a neat little bow on it because it is self-contained. Like you said, it's a loop, and it's very well told, and is delivered to us in this little package of grief. So I think it was very well done. What do you give it for story?
I gave it a 13, partly for the reasons that you said, but kind of ties into a lot of things that you said, that this is a wartime story not told on the front lines, but through the repercussions of what war brings to any country, whether it be, at this point, the losing country of Japan, where America is bombarding them constantly, but it's told in a very beautiful way. The only movie I could really think of that kind of hits that spot of kind of like an imagery of like a sunflower in a dead field, of like there's all of this tragedy, but out of that can come something beautiful, is probably like Boy in the Striped Pajamas, where they have this like beautiful friendship all while this horrible tragedy is going on around them, but it's you connect to those things that make you happy during times of tragedy, like the loss of a loved one. It's a terrible thing to happen, but what connects you and makes you happy through those moments is the memories that you faced with this person, or a picture of you with that person. So, and that's what I feel that this movie kind of is. It's tragedy, but finding a beautiful thing in that tragedy, and it's the relationship between these two siblings. It's infectious. It's told very well. Again, there are some story elements that I kind of don't agree with, and that might fall under suspension of disbelief. But I'm happy with where my score is for story.
Yeah, I do want to add, I think that it was a very interesting moment when we find out that Japan has lost the war and Saita is inside of the bank and he finds out. And honestly, it's an emotional gut punch to him as well that Japan has lost, because we get this flashback of him at the naval display and seeing all of the strength and fortitude that Japan is showcasing, and knowing that his father is a part of it. To know that Japan has lost the war means that his father has also lost what he stood for, and what Saita has grown up knowing to be this powerful, military complex of the Japanese Empire. And then that snowballing into realizing that while the war is over, unconditional surrender, the naval fleet is destroyed, my dad is probably dead. So having those consecutive gut punches in a row as well was, again, just beautifully told, because there is certainly a way to do this in a distasteful manner where it feels as though you are simply trying to pile grief onto the audience. And it did not feel that way. It felt very organic and genuine. I just give the movie on the whole props for handling such heavy issues with such grace.
Lasting impression, I gave it a 13 out of 15. This is a movie that obviously upon multiple rewatches is going to be sticking with me for a long time. It's definitely has a reputation. We knew it going into it that it was going to be a very depressing movie, that it's one of the more heart-wrenching Ghibli films or just even animated films in general, but I wasn't expecting this much happiness in a movie of this gravity, and it's something that I will come to look back on and continue to hold on to as we go through this journey. So, and it's obviously left a very big impression just on overall pulp culture and just cinema in general. Like, people talk about this movie a lot of, how heart-wrenching it is, but it's still here. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, you matched your score between story and last impression, and I did as well. I gave this a 12 out of 15.
Okay.
And I agree with everything that you said. I think that there are a lot of powerful takeaways to be had from this movie and lessons to be learned in finding strength in discomfort and happiness in grief and finding those silver linings and knowing that it's the people around you that make this thing that we call life worth living. So it will
Mhm.
stick with me. And I think that there is a lot that could be gained on a rewatch too. But yeah, a very powerful
Clearly.
told. What do you mean?
I said
Oh
clearly
yeah,
after
yeah.
watching it 4 times.
Yeah. Visual and auditory appeal. I wasn't swept away with this movie when it came to the visuals. I thought that the animation served its purpose, and I thought that a lot of what we were looking at was visually bleak, which fit the bill of this movie. And I think that the score was also very strong and pulled at the heartstrings and matched what it was that we were looking at. I am going to give it an 8 out of 10, however, because I
Mm,
think that it was above average, but I don't think that it was quite at the level of a 9 or a 10 that we would see with something like Spirited Away or other movies on the animation front that really just take you off your feet. I think that there was a lot of very good visual symbolism, and I think overall that the animation and the sound design and the score are strengths of this film. But I put it at a very high 8 for now, and that's where I'm going to leave it.
gotcha. I gave it a 9. Just going back to, we gave Spirited Away a 10 out of 10 because there is not a movie that looks like Spirited Away. I know we still have, I think yes, both Spider-Verse movies on this list that really pushed the envelope of animation, which I know Spirited Away did. This movie wasn't necessarily, like you said, pushing anything in terms of animation towards like a breaking point, but it still was a Ghibli film. So all those details, all of those, this how smooth the animation looked and just like all the colors that they use, especially for like when you can tell between what's the real children and what's the ghost children, was very nice. And again, the score added so much depth and so much emotion to each scene that it was included, because you don't hear the score often. A lot of the times the movie is just silent and it's
Mhm.
just you're hearing what's going on around you, but it picks the moments to use the score very well, and the score accompanying those moments is amazing. It's so beautiful. Shout out Michio Mamiya, that's how I'm going to say it.
Okay.
Michio Mamiya, which for creating such a beautiful score to accompany this animation, and it's incredible, but it's not pushing any boundaries that we would give a 10 out of 10 like Spirited Away,
Hmm.
or possibly in the future Spider-Verse. Spoilers, sorry.
Yeah, we've both seen
Space,
Spider Verse. We already know where that's going to land on the visual
I
and
know
auditory aspect of things.
exactly,
How
both
does
of
this
them
feel about the
probably.
pacing? Because I thought that it was a lukewarm part of this movie was the pacing, but I want to hear your thoughts. Your thoughts first.
So I gave it an 8, because to your point, there were points that were kind of dragging. I felt we spent a lot of time at the aunt's house just for it to be kind of like a lukewarm exit to the aunt's house, where I thought it was going to be much more grandiose, a lot more, a much bigger deal. Like I thought that they were going to die. at that point until we started to see that like kind of mend of the relationship, which I thought was going to be a boiling point. And if you're going to have us spend all of that time in the aunt's house, have it be that instead of just, oh, we're going to pack our stuff in a cart and the aunt's just like, oh, okay, bye.
Right.
But but I still thought the movie, like it's a very short movie. It's only about 90 minutes or so.
Hmm.
Maybe even a little less than that. So with the time that we were given, it was a nice 90 minutes to make you care about the characters, but I mean the characters are very easy to care about
Right. And there's only two of them, really.
for the
That was
most part. Well, the ones that you stick with, yeah, like they're very easy to want to connect with through the movie, but again, a lot of the story elements were only slight things dragged.
Yeah. I also gave it an 8. And
Okay.
I agree with everything that you said. I think that at certain points, the movie became a little bit cyclical where we were watching these siblings do the same type of thing a couple of times in a row. And there would be different skins on it, so to speak. You know, they would be doing the same thing in a different area. To me, that dragged it a little bit, but for the most part, the story stays on point. It keeps itself moving along. It's not told in a linear fashion, but for the most part, it is. So at the beginning, we have a look ahead, and then we move back, and I think that worked, knowing the ultimate fate of at least one of our characters. So yeah, I think on the whole, it had good pacing, but there were definitely some moments that I thought could have been spent more wisely, I would say. The acting I gave a 9 out of 10 because the voiceover work here on the original, the subtitled version of the film was just incredible. And the performances that the actors are able to give through the animated medium were mind blowing because you really felt their trauma and their grief and their strength and their love for one another. And that all came through in just their voice alone. They don't have any control as to what is going to be animated on their face as they are expressing these emotions that they are. And you really felt as though these performances cost the actors their emotional livelihood, and that at times is a sign of a great performance. Is you can tell that they were truly living in that experience, and it was difficult. It made it very difficult to watch. And when you can empathize with characters to the extent that I did when watching this film, I feel as though it's a great performance, and I think that they did a heck of a job.
Which it's funny that we talk about that. Because I forgot what score you gave Spirited Away, but I know one issue that you had was, kind of trying to see how you could connect with an animated movie just based off of a person's voice.
Hmm.
So I'm really glad that this movie, I also gave it a 9, by the way, that you could have this be in a different language that, again, you don't know the inflections, you don't know how certain words are meant to be said, but you could just feel the raw emotion through another language entirely and connect immediately with characters that are not speaking a language that are accustomed to. And it's for that reason alone that I give it a 9 out of 10, just because, again, the two characters that we are with the whole movie are standouts, and obviously there's other characters that go on like throughout the movie, and I don't really see like it. I feel like their performances overshadow the rest of the cast in a way that they kind of almost make them somewhat forgettable. Besides the ant, other than that, those three characters, we're not really spending a lot of time with anyone else to really get a good performance out of them, but these two make up for it tenfold.
Yeah, and
Suspension.
every other character still had good acting. It was just that we
Yeah.
didn't get to spend enough time with them for them to turn in an astounding performance. They essentially were there to serve their purpose.
Correct. Like they weren't adding on to the perform. This wasn't like a scenes from a marriage where when we even got like the two couple or the couple that we meet in the beginning, like they're
Mhm.
putting out a stellar performance as well, even though we're mainly with these other two characters.
Right.
Suspension of disbelief, I gave it an 8 out of 10 solely for Saita's stupidity, which you can label it as teenage angst or pride. You are doing all of this to benefit and try and save your sister and help her survive. And I feel like it was the stupidest decision you could have ever made, leaving your aunt's house because you don't like rice soup.
And then to not go back as well, because they probably could have. I think
Which
that's how they
also,
happened on the shelter to begin
speaking
with.
of the location where their little cave is, at the end of the movie, it's like I was so pissed to see, because obviously the war is over, but
Mhm.
now the more, the rich folk are coming back and being like, "Oh, I missed my house so much. I don't even recognize it anymore." Like you could clearly see like the more upper class people who fled the country during war times are now coming back and like enjoying their finer things in life that they missed out on, while the rest of their city was getting bombed and all these other people are having to scrap to survive. Cutting to right across from that house is the cave that they used to live in, and it just, oh god, I was so mad,
Mhm.
but in such a good way. But again, suspension of disbelief, 2 points down, just specifically for Saita just not letting go of his pride, and I think it was a really stupid choice.
Yeah, I also gave it an 8, and mainly for that reason as well.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
just because, like, you have your. I feel like everything else kind of like keeps you in, and you can believe everything that's happening, just accept that. But continue.
no, that's all. I mean, I don't really have much to add to that. I think that that decision making was a strong it. Yeah, that's what knocked the score down. Because for the most part, otherwise, I think that it grounds itself in reality very well. There's really nothing else that takes me out of it to the extent that that decision did. And I wish that they would have made an effort at least, or shown an effort, and had the circumstances be even more outside of their control if they wanted to get them to stay out of the aunt's house for story purposes. But yeah, enough of that. For originality, I gave it an 8 also. It's a story that's based in reality. It's semi autobiographical. It's based off of a short that had come out earlier. And it's a war story that tells a story about the horrors of war, again, like we've said, without being directly involved in it. Yeah, I think that it's a great little story for what it is, but it doesn't break this any kind of seal or glass ceiling in terms of groundbreaking originality. I could even probably knock to a 7, but I think they did a good job of making the story that was told original, despite its circumstances not being completely unique. We see a lot of movies based off war, and particularly based off World War II, but this still provided an original take. So I feel good there at an 8.
Gotcha. I gave it a 9, just because, again, we have seen stories like this, like I mentioned before, Boy in the Striped Pajamas, where it's a wartime story, but we're given kind of a little flourish of hope during a very terrible time. I had just never expected to see something like this in an animated feature. We have this expectation of like, animation, or at least like a broad take on it, is that animation is for kids, it's meant to tell happy stories. But this is where, you could see animation really pushing the boundaries and becoming more than just a medium for children. It's a medium, it's an art form, it's a medium for cinema. And that can be used in a manner such as this to tell such a gut-wrenching story, but not having the boundaries of live action to kind of hinder you, because this could have looked really really freaking weird in live action if we were going to still have the ghost children and all of that and all the imagery that we see. I feel it was told beautifully in animation, it was told in an original way, but it's not necessarily an original story, even though it's, like you said, semi autobiographical. Attachment, I gave it a 4. I was very attached to this film. Obviously, if you've been listening, I am so in love with this film.
Yeah, I gave it a 3. I really liked it, but I didn't quite cross that threshold of severe emotional attachment for me. So yeah, I'll end it there, pretty much right in the middle. But Yeah.
Gotcha.
So 4.5 stars for you, 4 stars for me. Let's see where Grave of the Fireflies ends up on our list, which is gaining some ground now. I think that we're getting to the point where we have at least a respectable amount of movies and where the rankings actually make sense compared to how we liked the film. So yeah, it's exciting to get to see this list really starting to come together.
Exactly. And now it is being put at the third spot, just going over Wild Strawberries, which we had at an 80. So this is our fourth movie in the 80s, which
I
is
can't.
fantastic to see.
I'm looking at this list and I see Scenes from a Marriage and Fanny and Alexander at 6 and 7, and just those are those might be like in my personal top three. I'm curious how they got to that point.
Because of me, probably.
I guess. I
Because
guess.
of me being like, look at the top three. Well, first of all Japanese and two Ghibli films.
Yeah, I would say that 1 through 9 I enjoyed thoroughly. And when you get to Sunset Boulevard and downwards, those are the
Oh
films
yeah.
I still enjoyed, but not to the same extent. And
I'm still
yeah,
upset about Sherlock Jr., bro.
for the most part, though, I mean, this is a list of incredibly strong movies. Our top, our numbers 4 through 11 are all within 10 points of one another. So,
hmm
um,
Those 70s are really good, man. And then you got Sunset Boulevard.
yeah. Well, I'm interested to see where our next movie lands, and I'm curious to see what our next movie even is. So,
Me too,
shall we?
dude. Let's dive into it.
All right. So instead
Just
of putting it in the rafters, I think we're putting the Fireflies in the grave.
we are as they should be because that's how thematic, I don't fucking know. There's too
Okay.
much gin
Spin the
in the bottle.
wheel.
I was trying to sound smart like Parker. All right, let's spin it, baby. All right, best time, dude. Here we go. Here we go. Okay.
It's lagging.
What is
We
this?
got City Lights, 1931.
Oh my
All
god.
right.
What do we got here, dude?
And what number was it ranked at when we first created the list?
92.
Oh, okay. Interested to see if this is still on there.
This is what the
Charlie Chaplin.
Oh. All right. It's at
And this
90
is,
now, so it's
yeah,
dropped
currently at 98.
7. All right. Okay, so City Lights, a Charlie Chaplin film directed by Charlie Chaplin. True blind love. A tramp falls in love with a beautiful blind flower girl. His on and off friendship with a wealthy man allows him to be the girl's benefactor and suitor. And that's all we get. It's currently sitting at a 4.3 average rating on Letterboxd, so this is looking to be pretty interesting. I've never seen a Charlie Chaplin film before, so we're gonna see how he squares up with these other movies, and we'll see where he lands on this list. What are you thinking?
Yeah, this should be interesting. I'm trying to find out, is this a silent film?
Synchronized sound. Okay, so it's not a silent film.
So that'll be interesting because Charlie Chaplin, of course, for the most part, is a star of the silent era. So
While the film So this is interesting. While the film has no audible dialogue, it was released with a synchronized musical score with sound effects. So contrary to, Sherlock Jr., where it was performed live, the movie came out with sound in it already. It's just there's no
okay.
words spoken,
So
which
it's still
makes sense. It's Charlie Chaplin, so
in essence, it is still a silent film. So
mhm.
all right, I'm
Love
excited
that.
to see. I'm excited to see this. I think it'll be fun.
You know what
Always
this
want to dive
means?
into some Charlie Chaplin. What was that?
You know what this means?
What?
We have officially broken the streak of foreign language films.
Yeah, now we have no language films.
It's an American movie.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So there we
All right.
go. It took
Awesome.
us
Well,
having a movie with no dialogue to finally get out of our rut of foreign language film.
that's all right. I think I've enjoyed our run, and
Same. I've loved it.
yeah, there's still so much for this list to offer. There's still so many great movies for us to watch, and I'm sure that City Lights, no matter where it ends up on the list, will still be something worth watching. So I'm excited to dive into it, and I'm excited to get back on the horn with you, Felix, and discuss it on
Absolutely.
the next episode.
Absolutely. So, as always, it's always such a pleasure to talk movies with you, especially this one. I've been wanting to talk about this one for a very long time. So, as always, where can people find you?
Yes, well, I invite all of my spooky friends to check out Spooky Senders. Around the time of this episode's release, you'll probably have a release of our HHN 33 recap for Orlando as well as for Hollywood. We got to explore both events this year, so there should be two separate episodes coming out or already out for you to go and enjoy. Also, you can find me on Letterboxd at Parker underscore Paget, I think. Yes, at Parker underscore Paget. Would
Can
love for
never
you
get
to
this,
give me a
bro.
follow on there so you can see the movies that I'm getting to experience outside of the Letterboxd Top 100. As an A-list member, I like to get out to the theater whenever I can. So if you want to see what else I'm watching, give me a follow on Letterboxd as well. What about you, Felix?
You can also find me on Letterboxd at ETZIO911. I also have a list, and I'm hoping to get out to the movies on my next days off. I've heard a lot about Conclave that I'm really excited for. Also, Heretic, the new A24 horror movie coming out, or that's already out. I'm dying to watch it, so I need to get to the theaters. But if you want to know how I feel about it after I've watched it, please follow me on Letterboxd. Please also follow the LetterBros Letterboxd account to continue on with our ever growing list. To see and to just catch up, comment, like our reviews on there. We also have our own reviews of the movies that we've been review or that we've picked. So just go on there. Also follow us on Instagram to look at all of our reels, look at our trailers for our next movie that we're going to be watching, and make sure to review and give 5 stars to this podcast version if you're listening to just our voices. But until next time, as always, Parker, this has been great. Thanks for listening to the LetterBros podcast, and we will see you at the movies.